Good afternoon. It is Wednesday, September 25th, 2024. I'm your host of the Seattle Real Estate Podcast, Dan Edwards, with the Seattle Real Estate Team and the Eastside Real Estate Team. Welcome to our podcast. It's a fantastic conversation about what's going on in the housing market with our good friend Tucker Maxwell. We'll be talking today about the big issues that show up during inspection, how to be aware of them and how to handle that. And then during our mortgage moment, we're going to be talking a little bit about what's going on in the market, as well as discussing the features and benefits of the FHA, VA, and USDA loans. And no, it doesn't mean you get a free steak with each house or with each loan, but it's the same organization, if you can imagine that. All right, well, let's get started with our Real Talk segment. Are the five major issues that can arise during the home inspection process. Now, during the home inspection process, usually you're going to hire a home inspector. If you're a first-time buyer or even an experienced buyer, it's a good idea. We highly recommend that the house be inspected. I will speak a little bit to the current market conditions. Sometimes the seller will provide a seller-procured inspection, and other times it won't be available. So you'll have to decide, depending on how popular the specific home is, whether or not you want to move forward without inspecting. However, I'll give you some tips and some tricks from a seasoned agent on what to look for on these issues and what's a big deal and what maybe needs a little more discovery and perhaps what is something that's normal. Keep in mind that I'm 50 years old. I got a few things that weren't as good as they were years ago, but they still keep, like, I can see with my eyes, but I got to wear contacts. That's a good example. Let's just use that one for there. So just because a home is old and not brand new doesn't mean doesn't mean it isn't in good shape. Likewise, just because it's brand new doesn't mean you don't need to watch out for some things. So of the five major issues, number one are structural issues. So problems with the foundations or walls can often lead to bigger issues, but they're often a symptom. When you notice something, there's symptoms like sagging roofs, cracked foundation, uneven floors. Now, again, like I said, an old house, maybe a 100-year-old house, most likely has some settling. And that doesn't mean that the home is about to fall down. It can be remedied in many cases. In other cases, it's a character attribute of the home. So foundation or walls, essentially what you're looking for is, if there's a crack in the foundation, how wide is that gap and how much has it moved? Oftentimes you'll see just a crack in a foundation. That's not the same thing. Is there a gap? And if you see a crack in a foundation, like, that could be troubling, where is it located? Is it located next to water runoff? Is it located next to a slope? Is there some erosion that's happening that's causing that? Or is it something, underneath the ground that you can't even see? There are structural specialists that can get in there and tell you, and there are companies like a Slab Jack that will actually repair some of those things. But just so you know, the older the house, the more sloping the floor could be, and it may not be an easy fix. Doesn't mean it's a bad house. You could live with it. You could also do some self-leveling stuff to compensate as well. Number two issue of the five major issues is electrical problems. Where we see electrical problems most likely, the one that always gets called out is improper grounding. This is not a big issue. Of course, if you have electronics and you get surges and you're not properly ground, it could wreck those electronics. So grounding that properly is definitely something that an electrician can remedy, but it's not usually very complicated. The second most popular one we see is GFCIs. So codes throughout cities and municipalities are often a little different, and some may not have a requirement that if it's near a sink, that there has to be what's called a GFCI, or ground fault interrupt. That means if water gets splashed up on there, rather than electrocuting the person, it pops a circuit that's in the outlet next to that. Now, sometimes you'll see these in a series. And what I mean by that is there'll be one that's maybe across the room and it's connected to all of the outlets along the back of the kitchen. They're every 12 feet here in Washington State. So if water splashes up on this one, it pops one over there. So sometimes you may find some electrical issues where they show up there. Now, one of the more costly electrical issues you would find is needing to rewire aluminum wiring, which was done in the 50s. Highly conductive, but also highly creates a lot of heat. So you need to replace the wires there, or a panel. So there may be a panel that has not enough breakers in that panel that's out in the garage usually, or outside the house. Or maybe there are some that are called by Zensco that are just defective. So that generally anywhere from $800 to $1,500 to replace. So electrical problems. And it always, I mean, obviously fires can be started by improper electricity, electrocution, death, all that stuff. So don't mess around. However, those, I'm just giving you some kind of common ones. And then the next major issue would be a plumbing issue, leaks, right? So some of the less costly plumbing issues would be a leak underneath the sink, a garbage disposal not properly installed or leaking a little bit. The more major issues would be sewer lines. In the early 1900s, the sewer lines were built out of, concrete pipes, clay pipes. Sometimes there can be trees that, were tiny little saplings when the house was built, the sewer line was laid, that have now grown in there. So during an inspection, they're not going to look at the sewer to inspect it. So you actually have to add a sewer scope to it. Not all inspectors carry sewer scopes with them. So we do have some recommendations, if you're interested, for inspectors who also carry the sewer scope. And I would recommend that for two ways. One, if it's a home around the turn of the century and it hasn't been done recently, you might want to do it. If it's a home with, sewer line and it looks like there's a lot of trees between the sewer line, sometimes you don't know where it's at, you might do it just for safety sake. So that's plumbing issues. There's probably toilets that aren't seated correctly. Not a big deal, but could run into a bigger issue. And then roof damage. So obviously, when you look at a house, the exterior of the house is what we call the envelope, and the roof is the most protective of that. One of the small things could be not having the proper kick-out flashings or flashings to route the water into the gutters or away from the siding. That's called kick-out flashing. Obviously, more important issues is water and moisture. And then one that's not always thought about is in the attic, on the interior, between the insulation and the sheathing or the roof itself. There needs to be a good flow of air. And so on the edges of the house, you have these soffits that bring in cool air. And then at the top is either what we call a ridge cap or vents. So it allows, through heat rising, air to move through that roof structure. If that air is not clearly moving, then you could see mildew in the roof. That a lot of people are allergic to mildew. Other people feel like it's black mold. It depends, but most cases it's just damp air that needs to move. So not to mention the exterior, like how long the roof's been on. Most inspectors can tell you, and most homeowners should know when the roof was put on, so you can kind of determine how many years of life left. The Northwest actually, a 30-year roof will last probably about 25 to 30 years, 35 years, depending on the care of it. But in other locations where there's a lot of rain, South Carolina, I know there's a lot of rain in the Northwest, but South Carolina, where they have heavy, heavy rain, that roof may only last 15 years on a 30-year roof because of the amount of impact that the roof is sustaining from wind and rain. So roof damage. All right, the last one is heating and cooling systems. I got to say forced air heat is fairly common, but there's also what we call baseboard heating. There's air conditioning, there's mini splits. There's a lot of different kinds of it. And obviously, I advise my sellers to have their furnaces inspected and serviced prior to listing. So that's one way to kind of look at it. The age of a furnace can last anywhere from 10 to 15 years. Most inspectors will call out 10 years as being the age of the furnace. Now, full disclosure, you should go with whatever policy and plan that you want to. I had a furnace that was about 25 years old. We had it serviced all the time. It was not a high efficiency furnace, so I paid a little bit more on electricity, but it was forced air and it worked and it kept the house warm as long as we kept it serviced. So it was kind of an inexpensive solution. Nowadays, it can cost anywhere from $1 to $250 ish to have a furnace serviced, and you should probably do it at least every other year and make sure you're replacing the filters quarterly. So, all right. So those are 5 major issues. It's pretty comprehensive. Happy to answer any future questions that you may have about the home inspection. But I do recommend that you take some time, hire a professional who's going to help you kind of weed through these. And a good real estate agent will be able to work with the inspector to help you craft what we call an inspection response in the event that you wish to have a seller modify or repair or credit for some of those modifications or repairs. All right, that is your 5 things that can come up on a home inspection that you need to be aware. But there are, of course, more. And I thank you for watching. We're going to take a short commercial break. Then we're going to dig into these letters and loans and the stakes, the USDA prime choice loans. I'm just kidding, but right after this break.
The pest stops here. Green City Pest Control is your full-service pest solution for all your pest control needs. With an owner with 32 years experience, a board-certified entomologist, and rodent specialist, we do it all. Bats to rats, crawl space, or attic. Call us and we will resolve your problem. 425-413-9700.
All right, welcome back to the show. I am here with our good friend Tucker Maxwell. Welcome back to the show, Tucker. How are you doing?
Good, Dan. Thanks for having me back.
Hey, anything on that inspection thing from a lender standpoint that you want to add?
One, we just don't like to see the reports. We like to leave that in your hands. But yeah, I think it's just critical. We always, advise clients to do an inspection in competitive situations. We, see that sometimes buyers waive it, but it's an important step in the process. I'm very grateful for the home inspections I've done on the homes I've bought. I did have a question for you, in regards to the cracks in foundations. Is there like rules to like if the crack is running one direction versus the other, that should be avoided, or what are your thoughts there?
It really is not. I wouldn't just take the crack into consideration. You have to kind of look at what's going on around it. If it's pieces flaking off the foundation in that direction, most cracks run. What is this? Horizontal? Vertical. Sorry. Most cracks run vertical and they're fairly normal, but it's not the crack in the direction. It's how much of a gap it's creating. And then when you look at the erosion below or the foundation inside, and then you look at the floors kind of sloping. So those are things that a foundation specialist would be called in. Like if it looks significant, you want to call in and say, hey, not only is this going to be a major problem, but how much will it cost to fix it?
Gotcha.
So,
okay.
Yeah. Cool. All right. So let's talk about loan programs, FHA, VA, and USDA, maybe any other letters that you can think of, but let's talk about that. Tell me what's good about them and what's significant about them.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the first thing to mention is typically these loans offer a little bit more favorable interest rate than your conventional products. And by conventional, I mean loans delivered to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, your more run-of-the-mill loans. And the reason for that is these 3 types of loans, FHA, VA, and USDA, all have some form of governmental department or agency involved with the loan that backs against default risk. And so that's why they can be very competitive. Is on FHA, the Federal Housing Administration backs those loans. And if a borrower defaults, then the Federal Housing Administration steps up and makes the lender whole. Same with VA. The Veterans Administration backs that loan and says if this veteran defaults on their loan, the Veterans Administration will make the lender whole or some portion. Same with USDA. And I loved your analogy there, but you're exactly right. The USDA loans are backed by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And really the reason they want to do that is they want to create infrastructure and build up communities in rural areas. And so they give incentives to people to buy homes in these locations. But as a lender, if we're going to offer the advantages that we're going to get into, we want to know what happens when they default if they don't have a down payment and they have no skin in the game and they walk away? What's going to make a lender comfortable? And the USDA says, hey, lender, don't worry about that. We'll back you. We will.
And I just want to add when we talk about skin in the game, it
Yeah.
really means the loan to value ratio, right?
Exactly.
So how much of your own money is in equity versus the government may not be able to get their money back if there isn't enough in equity.
Exactly. Yeah. And we're always evaluating as a lender the likelihood of default. And when a borrower puts more down, the skin in the game, more down payment, they're far less likely to walk away from that investment. They have significant assets in there locked up. They're not going to default on that loan and just leave hundreds of thousands of dollars behind for the lender to absorb.
Yeah. So what are some of the attributes, in addition to the backing, that make these loans a consideration?
Yeah. So starting with VA and USDA, a major advantage is they don't require a down payment. So on both VA loans for veterans, specifically, you have to be active duty member of the military or, honorably discharged and retired, or an eligible spouse. They can buy a home with $0 out of pocket for down payment. Same with USDA loans, 100% financing. And so that's why they're very appealing, is people can get into these loans without having saved for a down payment.
Can I get into a condo in downtown Bellevue with a USDA loan?
So with USDA, I'm glad you asked that. It is specific areas. And so we have to determine where is it. Believe it or not, there are USDA approved properties in King County. So if we just expand King County, and most people don't think of King County as rural, but there are actually some USDA properties available. If you expand that, go to Snohomish County, Pierce County, Thurston County, a lot more USDA. And so USDA is going to think more of your rural, smaller towns. But back to your question, if you wanted to buy that condo in downtown Bellevue with a VA loan and you were eligible for a VA loan, you could absolutely do it.
No problem, right? Because it's
Yes.
anywhere. So are they by zip code in USDA?
Yeah, it's not exactly zip codes. They've like drawn areas. But yeah, typically zip codes or areas. Think towards Snoqualmie Pass.
So like Falls City, Carnation,
Exactly.
Northland, Hobart, Enumclaw,
Yep. Buckley.
parts in Maple Valley, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Buckley,
You think
Roy.
farming, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Farming and agriculture.
Yeah, I think not a lot of municipal services, maybe not a lot of roads and services. That's the incentive, is they're trying to bring home buyers, which typically have good employment that we've verified. So there's the stability of employment. They're investing in themselves and into the community. And so they're going to bring resources into that area. And so therefore the USDA sees that as a value to the agriculture that's already in that area, that's going to help support that area.
Okay, awesome. And then FHA. So that one, it can be anywhere, but there are some down payment requirements on that one.
Exactly. Yeah. FHA requires a minimum of 3.5% down. You can put down more if you would like. And really, FHA is reserved for people with low down payments, so 3.5% down, but also maybe with some credit challenges. As FHA is available to people with less favorable credit scores. And what's really nice about FHA is that it has mandated mortgage insurance. And it's not risk-based based on your credit score. So you're not getting hammered for having a low credit score on the mortgage insurance. Whereas on a conventional loan, it's risk-based. And so they're going to say, hey, low credit score, we're going to charge you more. So FHA is a great option for first-time home buyers with limited funds, or just borrowers with less favorable credit.
And if I understand it correctly, down payment assistance can be used on FHA loans.
Absolutely. Yeah, we can actually use Washington State Housing Finance Commission for FHA, VA, and USDA loans. So typically a veteran would just go VA straight. There's not a whole lot of, reason why they would want to do it. But yeah, we can actually pair the Washington State Housing programs with a USDA loan. So that way the down payment assistance covers the closing costs. They still don't have a down payment, but they can still get in with no money out of pocket, because that's the kind of the one hurdle for VA and USDA is it's not exactly $0 out of pocket, because somebody has to cover closing costs. Now,
Right.
Working with a great agent like you may be able to get the sellers to cover that. But in some situations, we as the veteran or we as the buyers on a USDA loan have to come up with 3 to 5% for closing costs.
Cool. Copy that. All right, great. Last but not least, are these costs are they more than conventional loans? Meaning the cost for the loan closing costs, are they more or less?
It depends. So, again, looking at each of them individually on FHA, you have an upfront mortgage insurance premium and a monthly premium, and you finance in that upfront premium. And so, yes, you're going to borrow more on an FHA loan than a conventional loan because of that upfront premium. And so there is a cost to that. The other thing is the mortgage insurance is permanent. So the only way out of that mortgage insurance, even after you get to 20% equity, is going to require a refinance.
Yeah.
There is some caveats to that. Somebody's going to call me out and say that, what if I use an FHA loan or VA loan and put 12.5% down? Yes, it could be removed in small instances. VA loan, same thing. You have a funding fee. And so there's a fee that you pay the Veterans Administration to have access to that loan. A lot of veterans are exempt from that fee if they're disabled in any capacity. But yeah, there can be some fees involved, but I wouldn't say they're astronomical compared to a conventional loan. I mean, title and escrow is going to be title and escrow. Your taxes for the county are going to be the county taxes. Lender fees are going to be the same across the board. But there are some nuances that may appear as more costly.
Okay. All right. So in conclusion, anything else that anybody watching this needs to know about these loan types?
No, I would just say don't ever rule them out. It's always important to work with the lender that shows you an FHA and a conventional option side by side, or if you're a veteran, a VA option versus a conventional option, and shows you the pros and cons and doesn't just assume one is better than the others. I have borrowers with fantastic credit, but we got a better rate on FHA and they didn't plan to hold the property for a long time. And so we ended up using an FHA loan in a scenario that we wouldn't typically think was for FHA. So just work with the lender that explores all your options before making a decision.
Awesome. I think it's a good conversation. Lots of great information. Before we let you go, what's the plan for the weekend?
I have two. I have first and foremost, if the Mariners are looking like they're going to get into the playoffs, I got the schedule kind of cleared to.
You even have the shirt on. I should have said something.
Man, I'm holding out. Typical, Mariners.
We lost yesterday. That's like
I know. Yeah, it's a long shot. But if that doesn't look like it's going to happen, I'm going to climb Ruth Mountain, which is up in the North Cascades, just about on the Canadian border. So looking forward to that. If the Mariners aren't in a playoff hunt.
So Ruth Mountain it is. Fantastic. All right.
That's right.
Let's see. I'm not sure. I think I've got a buddy that just closed on a house up in Skagit Valley. And he's like, oh, cool. I got a lot of work to do. Why don't you come over? So I'm going to go and try and find a bunch of open houses and buyers to work with so I don't have to go help them. I'm just kidding.
There you go.
Help them. So, awesome. All right, Tucker. Thanks so much for coming on. Appreciate the conversation. And join us next week when we will talk about whatever the heck it is we talk about when we decide to talk about it. Thanks for watching.